Hello,
Hey,
everybody.
Mike.
Welcome back to this week's episode of The War Room, brought to you as part of the Clonestar podcast. I am your host, Mike Overton, and joining me in the co-host seat this week is the wonderful Show Hurley. Show, how are you?
Not too bad, Mike. Thanks very much for having me on.
It's great to have you here. Now, this week, we are honoured to be joined by an incredible actor who is a self-described Shakespeare lover, feminist, and geek. She's appeared on 13 episodes of Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Online. This week, we are delighted to welcome the mother of the Klingon Empire herself, Mary Chieffo, to the show. Mary, thank you so much for joining us this week.
Hello, Katlo, as we would say. Thank you for having me.
So that's my
Mary,
first question. Do you remember all the Klingon?
I don't remember all of it, but there are certain phrases and things that both things that I said on the show, and then something like Katlo, and I think I did actually say thank you to Vogue. That was actually, because Klingons don't often say thank you.
Because there's
And
even a phrase for thank you in the Klingon
I
dictionary, to be
know.
fair.
I was impressed that it existed. I remember our translator was like, well, this is new. But it was in that very like intimate dilithium processor scene, one of the sexiest Klingon scenes. And right, I say thanks for helping or something like that. But yeah, that I do certain phrases that again got to say on the show, and then various ones that I've learned because they're fun to say. It's great.
so
Other than
sorry, Mike, go on.
I was going to say, other than Klingon, what other languages do you speak?
English.
Yep.
And then I am barely proficient in Spanish, but I studied it in high school, and then have Duolingoed a little bit, which also one can do Duolingo with Klingon now.
Yep.
So I did get that, but I am not proficient in anything else. But I would be eager to. My partner speaks a little French, so yeah. I wish. Well, it's funny, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this, but I love accents and dialects and really developing those for any and all characters. Obviously, with a Klingon character, it's very specific and distinct. But in school, I always really did gravitate towards enjoying, getting a dialect sheet and breaking things down. And once I do get that rhythm, I like to be able to pretend that I can either speak a language or from another place. But in real life, I'm not.
So with the Klingon that you remember, including thank you and things like that, would you slip it into your normal day? Like if you were getting a coffee somewhere and you got the coffee, would you say, I'm just going to slip it in here now and see that they notice what I'm saying?
Just imagine that Klingon at Starbucks. Yes, your name,
Yeah.
Laurel. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. I do feel like did I ever do that with Laurel? I remember in high school that was a fun thing. I was really obsessed with Wicked, the musical, and so I would tell people Elphaba instead of Mary to get my Starbucks. But I think at some point, at the right Starbucks, maybe at the next convention or something. Yeah, I've never slipped in a Katlo, but I should, because who knows? Someone
You
might
have to be more Klingon every day, Mary. I think wasn't that kind of one of the taglines of Discovery season one?
Yeah, exactly. Remain Klingon forever. It's impossible not to. I mean, it is incredible that, once you are an iconic, species in this franchise, you fully immerse. And I really, enjoyed being fully immersed, but it's incredible how it just lives with you forever.
So we've we've slightly jumped ahead of everything, but I have to ask, because we're into such a great topic already. How hard was it to pronounce the Klingon words initially?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's the language is, intense, and
Robust.
yes, robust. I think that's an excellent, especially the consonants, a lot of the, really back of the throat. We were very lucky. We had not only Robin Stewart, who was our translator, who does speak Klingon fluently as part of the Klingon Language Institute. And so she would give us the translations and pronounce everything that was being translated, and we would have recording. She would do fast, medium fast, and slow, whatever, sort of, so we could get a sense. And then we also had our dialect coach, Rhea Nolan, who was not didn't speak Klingon, but was, a dialect coach for many, many years, and came from not only voice and speech, but theater training. And we really hit it off because my training is in theater and Shakespeare, and again, breaking down dialects. So I was very fortunate that she kind of catered the way I learned how to pronounce the language to what my skill set was, which is, I think, any great coach or teacher, what they do. And I was very fortunate that the first 2 episodes I had like 2 smaller scenes.
Yeah.
So I kind of got to like get a sense of how I worked within the language and witness some other Klingons speaking a lot more. And I know David, who you spoke with recently, because that's how we first met, was he was Orek in that first episode, and he had some fair amount of Klingon going on there. And then I did, though, in the 4th episode, though I think it may be one of the longest titles of a Star Trek episode ever, the Butcher's Knife Cares Not for the Lamb's Cry.
That's right. Yes.
I remember hearing that's one of the longest, but that episode I did have, full scenes. And so I felt by that point, I knew the general system I liked of breaking down the text. And so Rhea and I were really able to spend some time. I was back in LA because I wasn't in the 3rd episode. So we were able to get on FaceTime and do like 2-hour sessions where I would have worked on it a certain amount, and then we would work on it more together. But yeah, there were moments, because Rhea would be on set as well, and certain, like there are different H's, and that would be like the kind of finite nuanced note that I'm, happy to receive, because it does change the meaning. And we were also really trying to create this fluidity in the language. And an intimacy, like that dilithium processor scene that I mentioned. And so how to let these sounds exist when they're not on the bridge, because the language was developed by Mark Okrand primarily out of scenes that were happening where we were going, bah! And like, it made sense to have those sounds. And so finding ways to let it have that nuance, that those in the Klingon Language Institute who do speak it, with each other, we're like, yeah, no, that is how when we are speaking Klingon together, we're not just spitting on each other.
So I have to question. So like with Duolingo, you'd often see, ads with kind of, it shows kind of like, hardworking people going for their run in the evening and they're listening away to Duolingo. Were you given any tapes to listen to with like the Klingon kind of language, somebody speaking it, or so if you were out for a run, no one would have a clue that you were listening to somebody speaking Klingon in your ear.
It is funny, because I was just thinking back about, especially with that 4th episode, because there were so many scenes and lines that I do remember walking my neighborhood with the recordings. And yeah, totally. Just if anyone else was walking by, they'd be like, what is happening? And you don't really want to do it quietly. Like, you don't want to rehearse to backpedaled in it, because then that's your muscle memory. So you do really kind of have to practice almost more extreme to then dial it back.
I suppose the other thing as well is, back then no one knew what Discovery was.
Totally.
So there's, in other words, I just got these visions of you walking down the street and people are just going, who is this crazy woman who's shouting out God knows what?
Oh no, Mike, it was probably worse. There was probably locals like ringing the police station going, listen, this person's out here again, like she's speaking a really weird language, very angrily as well. What's going on?
Yeah. She's really upset about something. Yeah. There's some long distance relationship that's not working out right now.
So Mary, let's take it all the way back to the very start then. Where did the desire to become, say, involved in acting, theatre, and all that come from? Like, did you grow up in a creative house, or where did it all come about from?
Yes, I did. I very much grew up in a creative house. Both of my parents are, and still are, working character actors, as the phrase goes. I continue to investigate why the label of character actor. I think we should all be character actors, in the sense of creating a character and building a full world, but, playing more extreme characters, I would say. And very much what we were striking for last year, they were working actors who made their living, they were on various TV shows and commercials and certain films, and had, were able to make their living from those gigs, and then the residuals that, we have continued to fight to make happen now again for those of us who are currently and continuing to be working actors. So I was in that environment, but as a consequence, I grew up in LA as well, in the Valley. So technically I'm a Valley girl, which is always funny to me. But up until around fourth grade, I really didn't realize that acting wasn't what everyone did. Because in my mind, my parents, again, would have an audition or be doing a job and they would be dressed as their character or be talking about being a doctor or a lawyer or whatever it was. And I kind of was like, oh, right, that's what everyone's parents do, is like when, you know, Molly says that her mom's a doctor, it's because she got in her little outfit and said, do I look like a doctor? And then went and read some lines. And so I think, you know, a mixture of that and then just being, you know, a very creative kid who was very like fostered in that realm. Like my parents signed me up for dance classes and for soccer, so I got my athletic stuff there too. But you know, and growing up, my mom and dad both were doing plays in addition to being on set and film, and you know, up until I was consistently going to school, would kind of be in those environments. And again, just kind of thought that's what everyone did until around fourth grade when it just, I don't even know, it was probably just like brain development. Somebody kind of was like, no, my mom's actually a lawyer or something. And I was like, oh, so there are people that pretend to be those things, but there are people that actually have spent many years studying and practicing, and much respect there. So
what you're saying is, Mary, you didn't go home one day to your parents and just say, it's all lies. Why didn't you tell me? Like, I thought you were a doctor. Like, what's going on here? Like,
yeah, exactly. I was like, you shielded me from the world. It is funny because I do like, I don't think they realized how much I had like really thought that that was the case. It's so funny. And it's, you know, being aware at that point, my best friend Eve and I, who is still one of my dearest friends, we were then doing all these imaginary games together and started filming them. Basically, she had a camcorder, and so there was an idea of like, yeah, we're making movies, we're actors, like this is what we want to do, we want to be a part of this world. But it was just like within that time in fourth grade where it really shifted, that not everyone in my class wanted that either. Like I think at that point in time too, it's like that's the moment where some kids are like, I don't want to play imaginary games anymore. And then there were those of us that were like, no, we need to find ways to keep playing in these worlds as much as possible. And so even I really kind of bonded over that and would edit, you know, on iMovie, and we were very fantasy particularly oriented, but anything genre. And we're both only children, and we would always be British sisters in some sort of magical realm that most likely were the chosen ones, and in some capacity dragons were involved often, you know, that sort of stuff.
wait a second, Mary, hang on a second. I have to find out now. How good was the British accent?
Well, I thought it was fantastic at the time.
You're saying it hasn't aged well, Mary. Is that what you're trying to say to me here?
Yeah. You know, it would be interesting. She still does have like all the tapes, and we do keep saying that we need to
release them, Mary. The world needs to see these adventures.
Yeah. I do remember, and we go, sister. Like, and it's so funny too, these two only children being like, because what you call your sister is sister all the time. You never call them anything else. We do, I mean, we were definitely, I grew up with a lot of different UK British exposure, where I'm very grateful for that. Both watching everything on the BBC, you know, 70s comedies from Faulty Towers to Keeping Up Appearances, and you know, everything in between, and then also was very into Harry Potter at the time, and Chronicles of Narnia, like those sorts of worlds. So I was definitely very exposed to that accent, but again, I was also in fourth grade. But it was definitely, the one that we gravitated towards. But that was really, the shift there of creating those, realizing that not everyone wanted to, you know, be creative in that way. And then we would have school plays. And then middle school, I ended up auditioning for this performing arts middle school. That I got into their musical theater program and just really that's when it was like, oh, I'm a musical theater kid, and found my people there, like found more you know, kids that were willing to like dance around and sing at lunchtime and anytime. And that's when I think it really started becoming something that it was like my passion. It's something that my parents did and loved, but I really loved, you
You're
know, this.
making your school, Mary, sound like it was like from the TV show Glee, that kind of like
Yeah,
out of
yeah,
nowhere, everyone would just suddenly just break into song and
yeah.
dance and things like that.
Yeah, perfectly choreographed. It is funny though, the high school, I didn't end up going to this high school, but Burroughs in Burbank is one of the schools that like has like the most intense show choir, likely. So I had a fair amount of friends come from my middle school to that school. And it was like right before I think Glee came out. So when Glee did come out, I was like, oh yeah, I know that. And like they were like, you know, in the show, it's like the really cool ones that they're like intimidated by. Like it was that level of like amazing theater and like, you know, incredible. So it is funny. I was definitely exposed to it, but no dancing and singing spontaneously, perfectly
And
choreographed in real life.
as you were kind of starting to kind of develop these kind of talents and then kind of enjoy it, were your parents kind of supportive of it, or were they there going, "Stay away from the profession, please, no, stay away from it"?
They did I feel like a great job of letting me, you know, discover what I loved. You know, there wasn't this big forbidden, don't do that. I think, and earlier, I forget what we were talking about, but I was thinking of Siddhartha, the book, is like this, the idea of, you know, the Buddha being not exposed to the world and then seeing it and then going, well, this is actually really fun. So I think that they had read that book and were like, okay, we can't shield Mary from everything. There's
You
a
can't
really
lock
great
her
show.
away and just turn her off from the
Yeah,
world. Yeah.
exactly. It's funny. I was just thinking of this book this morning because one of the books I'm reading called Life Isn't Binary, which I highly recommend to everyone, really examining all the binaries in our world, from good, bad, and, you know, rational versus irrational, all these ways that we can get really trapped. More on that later. But I was reading a section about emotions, and I was thinking of this childhood book that I really loved called, I think it was Pandora's Box or Dora's Box. That's what it was, Dora's Box. So it wasn't Pandora, but it was a young girl whose parents, you know, before she's born, or they meet a witch in the woods, and they save the witch or something, and she's like, I'll grant you 3 wishes. And they say, we want a child, and we want her to not feel any pain. That was the second wish. And then the third is that she'll be loved by everyone, essentially. Great wishes, but you know, that she'll be able to thrive and be celebrated in the world. And so they have the kid, and she gives them this box and says, anything that is painful, anything negative, essentially put it in the box, and then she will never experience the pain of that thing. So anything from like a thorn, or, you know, I can't remember many of the
Someone
other
calling you a name, or yeah.
yeah. So finding ways to like put that in the box, and then eventually she has this bird that she loves, a little girl who is very sweet, but is a little odd. Like people don't quite understand her because she doesn't have this sense of pain in the world. And she has this bird that she loves, and the bird dies, and they put the bird in there, but she doesn't feel the pain of the loss, but she doesn't, like, there's just a confusion there. There's something off. And she eventually finds the box, opens the box, and then feels all the pain of all these different things, and is able to cry, and is able to see all these different parts of herself. And that is the only way that the third wish is able to be granted. The only way she can really fully be in the world is to experience all of that. So it is funny. I had just been thinking about that this morning in relation to this chapter in the book I was reading. And I do think that does relate to my parents exposing me to, like, how could they were like, well, we're here, you see the joy, you see when we are working on a play or have a role that we really love on a show, and like how much joy that brings, and the fun of being on set. And yet also you get to see the moments where you don't get the job that you worked really hard on the audition, or you do get the job and then you get fired. You know, like there's so many wild things that happen in this industry on a daily basis. And so they were like, you know, you have a good sense of the ups and downs of this world. And then, you know, within that, I was starting to move towards musical theater, which was not something that either of my parents were like, they, love, musicals and stuff, but neither of them were like particularly like singer dancer people. And so at that point it was like, yeah, great, Mary's really getting into doing musicals. And I did see Wicked in 7th grade, and that really, talking about representation, for me, Elphaba was the first time I really saw anyone who felt like in proximity to who I was on stage. There were, various things before that, but it was just like a profound moment to be the protagonist. I think that's a big, shift too, is like, they're fun other side characters and things like that, but to be like, oh, this woman has power, it's complicated, it's flawed, and she's got heart, and she's green and she, and I saw, the first time I saw it, it was Shoshana Bean, who also has like very angular features like I do, is a little bit, broad shoulder, like, and has a very like substantial, strong voice. And so again, to see someone who felt in proximity to who I was really significant. So it all just kept tumbling, and my parents happened to be there, literally seeing that show, and like saw the passion that it ignited in me, and then saw my dedication, because going into high school, I didn't go to a performing arts high school, but I had a really incredible drama teacher, Josh Adele, who is still a dear friend. And, at this point, he's a peer. It's so funny how you like, age is so funny, because now it's like, yeah, I'm friends with people that are older than him.
Yeah.
And so it's like, and still in my mind, it's like, yeah, but he did a great job of really, treating us like adults within, like, there was like definitely, still he's the teacher, but he also called us all by our last names. And so he was Adele and we were, I was Chieffo and, whatnot. And so there was kind of this way of creating an equal space while still creating respect. And I think it was also practical because less people have the same last name.
What did he like in terms of what did he teach you then, Mary? In terms of, say, you were obviously into musical theater and things like that,
Yeah.
and you kind of go to his class. In what way did it kind of change your perspective on kind of what you wanted to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think he really did, because he had gone to NYU and studied a lot of Strasberg and obviously Stanislavski from that, or whatever it was, Stanislavski, then but a lot of a relaxation technique was a big thing, and that he really used, where you're like in a chair and kind of letting your emotions out. Again, a big theme of today for me, and always. But the way he set up, you have a beginning drama class and then an intermediate that's kind of a full year, and then there were plays, one play and one musical each year that you audition for. And I, coming in, having been this full musical theater kid at this, was like, I'm gonna do all the plays and all the theater, and and honestly, I was a bit cocky. I was kind of like, they
No way, Mary.
Yes.
I would never say that you're a cocky individual in any shape or form.
I'll show them what theater is. But I had just come from being in this great environment. Like, I've been very lucky that in various chapters of my life, I've been a part of great ensembles, whether it just be social circles or the actual shows I was in. And so I did come in kind of being like, but he really did. I would say, I love that you asked that question, because I feel like he really grounded my work more. And especially even in the very first play that we did, and it was, like seniors and juniors end up getting the larger roles. And of course, as a freshman, you're like, rah, rah, rah. But it makes sense because he's gotten to know everyone and has picked plays that will really give, have great roles for these folks. So eventually, I understood. But I was playing, it's this very fun play, Once in a Lifetime, Kaufman and Hart. So an earlier play, big ensemble piece, kind of actually making a comment on Hollywood, old Hollywood. It's like, and so there's a lot of fun little characters. And I was playing this one like maid or something like that, who introduced someone into a room, and I kind of came in being very like theatrical. And instead of going, no, like that's wrong, he went, hey, I feel like, what if we made this character that she's really wry, that she's like over it? And it makes sense. Like, I think within the context of the play, that there's all these other kind of wild characters that I'm, having to clean up everyone's mess or whatever. And for the few lines that I had where I said various things, I ended up getting a lot of laughs because he saw that I had all this energy going on. And it was like, how do we just like streamline it?
Yeah.
And let it work. So moments like that. And then again, the classes themselves, he is very, he's just very well read when it comes to theater, always reading plays, new plays, classics. And again, I think that we're in this moment now, particularly where we're re-examining what defines a classic. And but certainly I got exposed to a mixture of, you know, well-known playwrights and newer playwrights, Lisa Kron being one of them, who I eventually used a monologue from one of her plays for my college auditions. And that really resonated with me. And she went on to, I mean, she's written a ton, but won the Tony for Fun Home more recently. And I never would have known about her or this monologue had I not been in that class. And I was very fortunate to, in my year, there were a lot of us who were really passionate about theater, and a lot of us are still pursuing acting or theater in some capacity now. So I was surrounded by a lot of people within my class as well.
Kind of,
But yeah,
kind of sounds like then, Mary, that like when you kind of went there, you were so full of energy, so full of I can do absolutely everything. But sometimes you need someone to kind of ground it and kind of give you a path in a specific way to kind of get the best out of it. Because otherwise, you could end up being a jack of all trades, but a master of none.
yeah, yeah, totally, totally. I think you really the folks in your life who can help you focus and know that it's going to evolve over time, but who can really see you and meet you where you are.
Mhm.
And I think again with that experience of like how he could have really damaged me by telling me I was wrong. Like again, this book I'm reading of the good bad binary, the more like we live in this society where we can, if you're anywhere in the gray, it can just be like you're bad. Like, you know, like we will go towards if it's not perfect,
Yeah.
it's wrong. And he never made me feel that way. It was always yes anding where I was. And yeah, I'm really grateful for him. And luckily, majority of the people in the creative worlds I've been in have had some level of that energy.
So where did the love of Shakespeare begin to happen then?
It really revved up in college and then out of college, really in like as I continue to examine like how we can reclaim it, how we can decolonize it is a term that I'm really enjoying. That I did I'm jumping all over the place. I'll start with my first exposure, and then I'll get into what I've been doing with here recently. We'll do it chronologically.
Yeah.
But my very first time I performed Shakespeare was actually between 7th and 8th grade at Theatricum Botanicum, which is this wonderful outdoor theater that was started by Will Gear in, I forget exactly when, but many years ago. And they have this wonderful space, and they had this summer camp every year. My friend Eve, who I mentioned before, had been going to it for years. And I'd seen shows there, all, you know, Shakespeare. And so that summer I decided, you know, I'm going to go and I'm going to do this camp. And we did Anthony and Cleopatra, or Antony, I should say. And I was Cleopatra number 3, which essentially was the third act of Cleopatra, the last act, which again was somebody yes-anding the energy I was bringing. I do remember them saying like, we wanted you to do the part where she's like captured and being sassy and then kills herself, you know, like
In other
really
words, save the best till last, yeah?
yeah. I did kind of, thanks. But it was really fun. And I did really feel empowered and enlivened by that kind of heightened text. I do think it was the first moment where I was also going, oh, this type of character in Cleopatra is like of the women in Shakespeare's canon, you know, one of the ones that really gets to fully be embodied and be defined, obviously, by her love of Antony, but is also freaking Cleopatra. And so I do remember really loving taking space, being able to take up space in that role and with those words and that poetry. And I had grown up also where even I met in school was a Waldorf school, which is Rudolf Steiner and very, you know, kind of alternative education and a lot of poetry, a lot of verse, a lot of singing, a lot of that was I will say I do realize now too, we had Spanish and German so I did have some German exposure as well when it comes to languages, but I definitely can't speak it.
Can you still direct somebody to the main train station in German, Mary? That's the you can't. Oh, Mary, that's the basics of it right there.
But I think I can say what I love you. Ich liebe dich. Is that I love you? I think maybe.
I'm pretty sure you're on board. Yeah, I think you're right with that. I can't remember. 10 years of German now has gone to the dogs. I can't remember how to speak English.
Let's face it, you only need to know 2 words, and it's Coca-Cola and McDonald's, and that'll get you pretty much anywhere.
Yeah, you will find your way. And you'll make a lot of friends. But I do think, speaking to the Klingon later, I think I was exposed to a lot of different sounds, and in learning more about dialects and accents and language, that exposure early on, I think, and again, the music, like rhythm, those sorts of things were so ingrained in me at an early age that then, yeah, tackling Shakespeare the first time, I was like, oh yeah, this is so in line with, my rhythms. And I did love singing. And then my final high school play was Pericles, one of the lesser known Shakespeare's, but a fun one with a lot of pirates. And I was Dionysa, the queen, who was starving. This became a theme for me. A lot of regal, powerful ladies. And then so and I think we touched on, some Shakespeare within some of the classes that Mr. Dell taught us, but I wasn't overly Shakespeare'd in high school. And then the training at Juilliard, where I ended up going for the conservatory program for 4 years, is very Shakespeare centric. And Alexander technique and Shakespeare were kind of the consistent things. And I think the two go quite well together. Alexander technique being all about the energy and how we speak to our bodies, and both as just a technique for any human in any situation, but also how it can be used to really be present and vulnerable in your scene work, and using that within obviously the Shakespeare text. And
how did you find taking on the Shakespeare text? It's like, it's not easy. I remember studying like Hamlet and The Merchant of Venice, and you're there going, I have no idea what's going on here. Like it's supposed to be brilliant, but I don't understand a word these people are saying.
Totally. And I do think that is the, unfortunate, aspect of modern Shakespeare, is that there are a lot of productions and interpretations that don't really live through the text. There's such a, we're still breaking free of this traditional way of doing it. And the best productions I've seen, the best performances I've seen, a lot of which were at school in second year rehearsal projects or in class, is when you're not beholden to a certain standard of how it should be done. And I think there's still, and I'm still a huge proponent of the rigor and training of, of voice and speech. There are some people that just throw away the text, just make it modern. And I still think that what Shakespeare gives us, and I was able to use this, with the Klingon as well, is it's about letting the sounds of the words really inform how you feel. And what is language but us trying to articulate feelings? That's why these words came into existence. And with curse words, there's a lot of sharp, hard consonants. And, the one example I like to use, and in school, I was lucky enough to play male and female roles, but I did get to play in Shakespeare, but I played King Lear, the second half of King Lear. I always get the second half of something. They're like, yeah, you put yourself on it. And then also later, Macbeth, Macbeth in Macbeth, but in King Lear.
Wait a second, are we allowed to say Macbeth? Are we supposed to just say the Scottish play?
I think because we're not technically in a theater space.
Yeah, I think it's fine.
That's my policy. I think it's safe on Zoom, but I did have the thought as well.
If the episode randomly deletes itself or something like that, we know why.
I know. It is, and Mercury's retrograde right now. We're really living on the edge. But I did oh yes, Macbeth. Yeah, but King Lear, the one example, I like to use is a contrast. There's the moment in the storm where it's the storm. He's just been like feels fully betrayed by his daughters. He's cursing everything and he's saying, blow winds and crack your cheeks, like, and it sounds like a storm. It sounds like his anger. And then at the end, spoiler alert, when when his daughter dies and he's carrying her out, he's literally saying, howl, howl, howl. Like those sounds are the primal sounds of mourning. And so that's just one great great example from the same character in the same play.
Did
But
you ever
it's just-
perform Hamlet at any point?
No,
Oh no!
I
It's never
know,
too
I
late.
know. Yeah, it's never too late. It's true. And actually, my partner, who I am going to celebrate them a little bit, a lot of it. I tend to do that. But just got into the MFA acting program at the Old Globe in San Diego. And one of their audition monologues was Hamlet. And so we've watched a few versions of the play recently. So Hamlet's been on the mind.
Did you watch Kenneth Branagh's Sheepers? Is it the early or mid 90s Hamlet that he did?
You know what? We didn't watch that one. That is funny. I feel like I've seen it in the past, but that was not. We were watching. There were a fair amount of more recent filmed productions that were great to see. Kind of just seeing how it existed on stage, and now they do pretty good jobs of recording stage versions of stuff. So I can't think of any of them right now, though. My brain has gone. I can remember Klingon phrases, but sometimes more recent stuff.
So Mary, when did you start kind of getting into kind of like, obviously you were kind of in drama school, you were in Juilliard and things like that, of kind of, performing in the plays that way. When you kind of left kind of Juilliard, when you kind of got out on your own, did you kind of say to yourself, I want to be a stage actor? Or did you say, no, I'm going to keep myself open. If something came up in TV or film, I'd like to give that a go. Or did you say, no, I really enjoy the stage. This is where I want to be?
I was definitely very open. I do, and I feel this ever more now. I think the most alive on stage. I love the rehearsal process of theater. I love doing the table work, doing the research. That just like that first rehearsal where you're sitting around and, reading the play for the first time and then diving in there. And especially obviously when you have a great director and you really get to explore for however many weeks and then get the previews and the audience and start to find out what that is. And like, I think because I am a very like studious structured person that I love building the house and then releasing into it. And then I'm just super free. And actually after I graduated from Juilliard, I shortly thereafter that fall did an all-female Othello where I played Iago. And that was such a great moment because it was I had just come out of all this training and like breaking down text, Shakespeare specifically, and Iago talks a lot and a lot in prose. So that was also a new experience because I think the rhythm of verse can kind of stick in your brain better. But I remember really having that feeling of like, oh, now I've built the house and now I can release and really discover in our run, who this character is. And of course, as I'll probably mention, I've continued to explore that role in many capacities because you're never done with Shakespeare or any role really. But when it comes to where I wanted to be acting, I think because I grew up with my parents who kind of did everything too, like in LA, they would always want to do theater, and they both came from being in New York as actors. My dad's actually from Long Island and my mom from kind of all around the South, but had moved to New York. So there was definitely this like love of that hub of New York theater. We would go back. That's part of why I got to see Wicked. We had an annual New York trip, and that's when I got to see the show there. And so there was that love of that, but then also, loving, certain TV shows and movies myself, like wanting to be a part of that sort of storytelling, I think is, such a different muscle. I think the theater muscle really kind of is like having this strong baseline, and then you just kind of learn how to give your energies it's a different type of stamina. But I was, definitely very open and eager to be a part of any and all mediums because I love stories, and each medium has impacted me as an artist just in witnessing it.
And Mary, just like in terms of say your personality, you're enthusiastic, you're driven, you're completely larger than life, and I mean, we've discovered that in the last while. In terms of then, like just the way you kind of describe it, in terms of say you getting stuck into kind of a story, building the house, kind of letting it out, and all that kind of thing. Do your nerves ever get to you? And if so, how do you handle that, or how do you channel that?
Yes, they absolutely do. 100%. I think, I'm definitely in an interesting point, like very much currently, part of why I'm reading so much about emotions, and I work in therapy as well, and like I can have a lot of anxiety come up, especially around being memorized. And I think luckily, again, like with Trek, for the most part, I would have enough time to really know the Klingon and all that sort of stuff. But there are a lot of circumstances, and unfortunately in TV, because scripts are being written and changed and all that sort of stuff. Whereas an actor, you don't have the luxurious theater, I'm working on this play and the lines aren't changing. And so for me, I have to really work through a lot of my perfectionism and wanting to get every word perfect. And you do ultimately like want to be of service to the playwright. And that was a huge part of the Juilliard training as well, is very much respect for the playwright. Why did they choose this word? Why did they put a period instead of a comma? But there are a lot of different philosophies around that. Like, I think what I've continued to have to learn and accept is there are as many techniques out there as there are actors. And so I just really have to keep finding what mine is. And for me, and there have been some modifications made, especially around self-tapes and auditions now out of the strike, but it's still there, like in the turnaround. But there are a lot of moments where even like a 48-hour turnaround, which I believe is now the policy with getting a self-tape or an audition, it's still like you're in the midst of your day. You've planned your week because you don't know if you're going to have an audition. So you might be having to cancel a lunch or be like, well, I'm already in class, so I still have to go to that class. And then I have to find someone to help me with this tape. So you're balancing all these plates and then also having to work on this role and memorize these lines. And what I've found in those circumstances, and I've talked with a fair amount of other fellow actors about this, is like having that moment of allowance of at least stress and or overwhelm. As Brene Brown says, like overwhelm is where you like you're in that fight, flight, or freeze sort of moment of like, I can't to be like, how many lines do I have to memorize? What is this character? Da, 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 da. Allow yourself to breathe through that. Don't live in that forever. And then go, okay, what are my next steps? And that's more of the managing of stress. And like, for me, luckily, I do have a lot of tools that I can lean on. I can know, recently I had to memorize something where I had a Swedish accent. And I had to go and find a dialect sheet and reached out to someone to get help. Like, what's the first step, Mary? Okay, just, you've done this before, maybe not with a Swedish accent, but like just one foot in front of the other. Then knowing what's the time I have. With that, I had a little more time. So it was like, this day I want to be this memorized, or I'm going to break the text down this way. So just coming up with a plan is very helpful to me. And I say all that, and in addition to that, so that's the ideal situation with a scripted thing where I actually, maybe have some time or have enough time to build a structure for myself. There are other times where you just don't have the time, and you kind of have to trust, and you either like print out the lines and put them on the wall and hope that they work there, or I've been doing a lot more long form narrative improv, and just being in any sort of improv setting also makes you have to trust your instincts and know that you can build a character out of nothing, that you can have an emotion and discover why you do later in the scene. And so I've been really trying to like embrace that more and more, but there's a big, strong part of my brain that's like, I don't know. It's the little wrong.
Always sitting there niggling in the back of your head.
Yeah.
Now, Mary, we made you do a British accent earlier, and like you mentioned a Swedish one, and I was there
Oh
going,
no.
Mary's not getting away with that one. We've got to hear what the Swedish accent is like.
I feel like it was one of those things where I'm trying to think of what did I say even in that? The big thing was that there's and y'all have such great accents, so now I'm just like taking them in. We kept that share, like instead of chair,
Oh, yeah.
like there's so I'll give you a share. No. I'll say his accent for you. But I can't. It is so funny. I was like, what was like a well, what was really interesting, I will say, in learning about this Swedish accent was that this Swedish language just has so many more vowels that it's like 16, and how that is. This is where I love geeking out about dialects, and I did end up making a dialect sheet for the Klingon as well, for Lorel specifically. But like, because there's so many vowels, the vowels are generally like pretty accurate to a Swede speaking English, but they're usually longer, and then there's the whole pitch thing, which is like, that's the thing where you definitely want to have a dialect coach to help move you through that, because you don't want it to be a caricature. It was really interesting to be exposed, but I really cannot think of it. It's like it happened, and now I'm like, what? Yeah, there's like, but often it is good to have like a key phrase that can help you kind of like lock into that.
So
But
share is your key phrase for the Swedish accent going forward.
Share and just really, getting those vowels, and for and I also think like right now I'm just like so hearing your great dialect, so now I'm wanting to.
In other words, you're geeking out about our accents, which is now preventing you from recalling.
That's what I'll say at least.
We'll go with
I in school at Juilliard, one of my favorite plays that we did as a rehearsal project was Dancing at Lunasa, which is the Brian Friel play in Northern Ireland. So I did work a lot on that dialect, and there's so many great recordings that Gillian Lane Plesha had made, like interviewing these Northern Irish women talking about things. And so I would like go to bed listening. And I really do love that element of where you can just find real people, because that's very affirming, because no matter what, you're not going to do a dialect perfectly, because everyone, again, is an individual. So the more that you're just like exposed to the culture, the more that it's gonna feel real.
I have to bring you back to something for a second, Mary. When you're talking about the all-female version of Othello that you did, and you spoke about, say, when you're trying to get out like what the writer has in kind of mind in terms, as you said, like, why is there a full stop there instead of a comma and all this kind of thing. When you're on stage and you've kind of said, this is the play that we're doing, this is how I'm going to read my lines and things like that, do you try and stay that way performance a night after night, or does it change depending on the night, depending on the audience, depending on the energy from other cast members? Or do you say, no, this is how I believe it should be spoken, this I believe it should be interpreted, and I'm sticking with that? Or what do you do?
Yeah, I really attempt at least to be in a very open place of being surprised and making new discoveries. I think, again, I think building the structure and having a deep understanding of the text is essential, but I think it's more about it's the why, not the how. So if you have a real sense of why your character's saying what they're saying, and that also can change in Discovery, but I do think, and unfortunately it can happen a lot with Shakespeare, because it's like, well, I have to hit the rhythm and like the iambic pentameter, that then you do see a lot of people on stage not acting with each other. You see them, just speaking towards other bodies, but they're not actually reacting to what's happening in the moment. So, and I did find that with that Iago and other theater experiences where I had built enough of a structure that then I was totally open to having a line come out a different way. And I think finding the musicality of all of that, again, because I am like musically inclined and I do really hear the melodies of speech. It's like to not get too caught up in that, be grateful that there's a tool, but then in the moment to continue to discover. And I really did. I love that you mentioned that particular production, because in being in a place of discovery with that role, particularly, I mean, Iago, who is incredibly elusive, I would say, in, you know, in the why. Like there's things he says why he's doing what he's doing, but I think that there's a lot more to investigate. And by being in a place of discovery, I was able to truly find some things that I had at least never heard or seen in previous productions. I hadn't seen a ton of Othello. I'd seen a lot in Scene Study and read it in high school, but there was a lot more dimensionality I was able to like find and infuse into the character by being in a place of like, but who is this person and why is he behaving the way he is? Where does he actually love? And, you know, I think it's just so much more fun than playing a one-dimensional character and being like, yeah, this is the way it's done.
I'm curious as well, Mary. One thing, I'm jumping completely forward in time here to the very most recent history, because I saw something when I was going through your Instagram page earlier on. What is the fascination and what is going on with something you're doing, Murder, She Wrote?
Oh, yes.
Because our audience probably has no clue who Jessica Fletcher is. And
but you do.
Oh, I love Murder, She Wrote. Oh my God, yes.
Oh my
Absolute
God.
staple of growing up in Ireland was Murder, She Wrote.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I'm so glad that you saw that and are bringing it up. Yes, so this long form narrative improv, which funnily enough, Star Trek is how I got introduced to this style, because they one of the groups, a part of this place, Impro, they would have different like student produced shows, and they had a improvised Star Trek that was the improvised generation. And at the time, the woman who was my now partner's roommate played the captain on that. It was, you know, a fictional ship within the TNG timeline. And they had a whole crew and then would improvise an episode of Star Trek every week.
Wow.
Live. And really, really fun. And especially, obviously, if you know the Trek world. And so that was 2018, I believe. I came to see one of their shows. And then this whole community, I've continued. I've taken tons of classes, and up until, I mean, to right now. And with this particular murder, she didn't write. So in general, this like genre long form improv is taking something like Star Trek, Jane Austen, Twilight Zone, the group that my partner created and that I worked with a lot, called Ripley Improv, inspired by Ripley from Alien, is a all-female genderqueer group, and they did a dystopian young adult novel was like their first genre, and then they did glam in the style of Glow, the female wrestling show. So it really can be all sorts of different things. And so, but Murder, She Didn't Write, Kirsten Farrell, who is the director of the show, is a huge Murder, She Wrote fan, and she came into it later in life, but started watching it and then binged the whole thing, and has like definitely watched
it multiple binge.
times. Yeah, a full-fledged binge, and just like loves Jessica Fletcher, like just as a character, and of course Angela Lansbury. I mean, and so she had for a while thought, oh, this is a style of show that can really fit in this improvised space, because like with Trek, when the structure is so clear and there is such that fun thing to discover, and that is what has really made me enjoy this sort of improv, is that a huge part of the process is watching the shows or reading the plays, whatever style you're improvising. You're getting to know these worlds. You're getting to kind of do all that fun theatery or TV research and breaking down, okay, in each episode, you know, we meet the people of the town, then we meet JB Fletcher and why she's there that week. And then, you know, there's what kind of characters. Often what we've discovered is like the most hated character is the one who gets murdered. Like it's kind of like, so it's like who is the most hated character, and just lots of ways in which you kind of find the structure of the genre, and then within that structure you're improvising, so you're not going to do it exactly the same way. There's no steps. In this version that Kirsten's been directing, we do pull one of the cast members' names out of a hat to be JB, which I think is very fun. So none of us know who it's going to be in that moment, and then you get dressed up in a few things that make you look like JB, and then she solves the murder. So it makes it very ensemble based. And then we all just like build characters, and you can play multiple characters, but
Oh,
usually
wow.
everyone's kind of a different, guest star kind of role. And it's so fun too, because everyone can be a suspect. Like on the show, often part of the fun is you go like, I feel like most people could have done this murder. And it is also, this type of improv is very relationship based, that like it's not about just coming in and stating when, where, what, wow, how, like right away. It's about being in a genuine scene, and by finding the relationship you have with the other person, then you do discover these facts. You still have to have a mind towards where are we? Like you do want to find that within the scene, but in Murder, She Wrote, often the murder doesn't happen right away. You have a lot of time to get to know the character. So it's been really, really fun. We just had, this run. I had the 2 shows that I was in the past 2 Saturdays. We have one more show at the end of this month that my partner and I are going to be the MCs at the top. So we're going to do like fun trivia and stuff like that. So it's kind of fun. We got to have like the sandwich performing days, and now we're kind of going out as hosts. And but I think it's been really fun. We've had sold out shows, and I think it's a great one that Kirsten's going to continue to develop. And it so can kind of like tour anywhere, and like like with Star Trek or these iconic shows, people everywhere love them and have a relationship. Not everyone knows it, but the folks that do, there's such a warm place in their heart for it.
There's a thing that you mightn't have seen, Mary. I think it's only over here in Ireland and in the UK. There's a guy, he does an event. It's a live event. I think like you can have 50, 60, 70 people at it. And it's called Salve Along, a Murder, She Wrote. And what your man does is he shows an episode of Murder, She Wrote. And basically everyone is playing along to try and guess who the murderer actually is.
Fun. Yeah.
So we all did at home, but in the theatre.
Yeah, it's in the theater. I'll send you on the link. It looks. I was actually trying to get my company to do a sports and social night at it, because it looks absolutely bonkers. Because like, who the hell is going to remember an episode of Murder, She Wrote from like decades ago?
Yeah.
And it's not like it's not like Columbo, where like Columbo knew after like 1 minute who the bad guy was, and just spent the next 90 minutes pissing them off, asking them questions when he knew exactly who they were. Like Murder, She Wrote was this different creature altogether. Mary, one thing I wanted to talk to you about is one of the things you've kind of brought up a few times. We talk about, say, emotions. We talk about like embracing kind of, like how we feel, who we are, and things like that. That seems to be a large part of your life. Was it always a part of your life, or was it something that you kind of grew and kind of like began to try and say, understand yourself? And was there a catalyst for that, or what kind of brought you into that journey?
Totally. I love that question. I've been loving all of the questions. I think I do reflect on how growing up with creative parents that were literally making their careers out of being in touch with their emotions in some way, and who had done a lot of their own personal introspective work. They are definitely like emotionally aware humans. There was definitely a lot of encouragement of expression. And I think so it's always been there. It's definitely always been, that, and I was a kid that kind of cried through transitions a lot, like learning how to swim, getting in and out of the bathtub, and I think, and again, there was space given for it. But I think also just living in the world, and again, this Life Isn't Binary book I'm reading, and I'm literally on the emotions chapter, so it's all very fresh in my mind, but they speak so much about there's the wider world, there's community, there's friends and family, and all of us are like affected by all of those things. And so what is the self? And I think, and I reflect on this not only with emotions, but also with my own queerness, which was something that like I reflect more and more on, that so many of our societal standards and ideas, what we see in the media, because I wasn't exposed to things that I recognized as myself, it was very hard for me to know where I fell in the spectrum of things. And so in the same way with emotion, I feel like I definitely felt like a very emotional person. And like all these anecdotes I've told, like me having a lot of enthusiasm, all these things were definitely very recognized in me. But I do think there was a lot of shame built around being so full. I think that our society can often diminish those of us who are enthusiastic, or also it's not just enthusiasm, it's feeling all the feelings. And I think if anything, continuing now where I am, and I would say in the past few years, and thankfully my partner Maddie and I are both very investigatory people. And we, are really keen on exploring that for ourselves so we can be better present for each other. And so I have really felt that like amped up even more, because I not only want to be present with my own stuff, but I want to be present for my partner. And I want to know how I can be regulated within myself so that I can truly be present and truly have vulnerable conversations. But going back to like, in the more I've read, and also I have really gotten into Brene Brown and her, the way she speaks to emotions, her most recent book, Atlas of the Heart, I highly recommend, because she basically goes through the 67 emotions and expressions that through her research and other people's research, we basically said, these are what we got. Probably more, but these are the main words that we have. And her whole premise is the more words we have, because most people say I'm happy, angry, sad.
Yeah.
It's like it's like the primary colors, isn't it? Like people often like there's no such thing as coral. Coral doesn't exist as a color thing.
Exactly. And so through reading her stuff, she does the audio book version of this, and it's like she's just reading it to you. Like, I wrote this book and now I'm talking about it, and I highly recommend it if you're into audiobooks as well. And there's on Max, HBO Max. I still am like, it's HBO Max, but they have like a 6-part lecture version of it as well. And I've just found those themes in conjunction with like this book I'm reading now, of putting more names to emotions. That's been a bigger revelation. I think being in theater and analyzing characters and emotions, like that was innately a part of my existence. Like I knew I had to be someone in touch with my own feelings in order to portray someone else's. So it was definitely, that vocabulary has been there, but I feel like every year I'm more and more inclined to like really investigate that for myself. And again, being in an intimate relationship where I deeply love someone and want to be able to have conversations around it and notice where there are, triggers for me around the expression of emotion. Again, shame has been huge for me in recognizing that, like, whether it's the wider world community, and in this section of the book I was just reading, they were saying like, and your parents, even if they have the most positive intentions, and not to use, because they were just talking about the positive negative binary and how that's not helpful either, but like if you so want, and definitely true for my parents, so want your child to feel free and loved and able to explore, but you're still reacting to the wider world you were exposed to, the communities you were, how your parents were. And this, one of the writers of the book was speaking to how their parents were so set on things being positive that they created like a cry chart, that if this writer, MJ, didn't cry, they got a gold star on the chart. And like, if by the end of the week they got a certain amount of stars, they got a treat. And so it was like this, positive reinforcement, but created so much shame around sadness and crying. And I think crying isn't necessarily sadness. It's literally water coming out of your eyes. But like, I think, so moments, reading anecdotes like that, but then realizing for me too, whether it be kids in school or whatever, I was never overtly bullied, I would say. I think a lot of people just like saw my energy and were like, whoa, but still that of like, whoa, like I think I do have a lot on being too much. And that is, an emotion in a certain way, or like that exuberance or just expression of self needs to be toned down a little bit. And so really working through how, if an emotion comes up, I can automatically have this compounded shame emotion, and like how to really work through going, oh no, if I can just be present with how I'm really feeling, then I can move through it. And whether it's anger, which I think is another huge one that we just as a society can shame so much, and there actually are healthy ways to experience our anger and experience it with another person. It's okay to be upset with someone you love. And it's just how we move through that. So
Did you
yeah.
ever see Fleischman is in Trouble, Mary?
No.
It's a show with Claire Danes and oh Lord, what's his name again? Oh dear God Lord. He was in The Social Network. He was in Jesse Eisenberg.
Yes, yeah.
And basically there's a wonderful scene in that. I can't kind of tell you exactly because it'll ruin the show. But there's a scene where somebody is trying to express, like, they're basically being told, shout, just let it all out. And like it goes on for like 2 to 3 minutes. And at the start, the character is kind of there going, this is really awkward. And then they start kind of getting into it and they realize, oh my God, this is actually a release of emotion. And like, as you said, Mary, you might think that anger and kind of expressing that is bad, but there, when you do it in a kind of in a setting where it's kind of healthy for you, and like the scene is incredibly powerful, and all it is somebody basically shouting, but it's as it grows more and more.
Yeah.
So, Mary, that's my recommendation to you, because you're recommending stuff to us all the time, right? So I'm recommending Fleischman is in Trouble to you, and it's the B story kind of in it that I'm really kind of asking you to kind of focus on. But Mary, with a lot of things with emotion and things like that, I'm just curious. One of the things you can find at times is that, like, as you said, we all grow up, we've all parents who are trying to create a healthy environment first. But do you feel at times our parents can be kind of caught in a situation where they're repeating things that they grew up with because it's what they know? And for all the will in the world, they're trying to create a new atmosphere for you. But they kind of get hamstrung by, well, this is what I grew up with, like, and this is what I went through.
Yeah. I mean, I do think it is this, I think it is so much of why we write plays, write TV shows, write movies. I think we are all trying to understand the cyclical nature of human existence, that we earnestly want to move past the traps that we fell into. And I'm now at that point where I can really reflect on different things that I struggle with and seeing them within both of my parents. I do think, and I think literally this idea of pain body, where you're like genetically carrying some of the pain from your past ancestors, I think is very real. And I do think that, and certainly witnessed it with my parents, again, seeing so much love, so much care, but then of course are in reaction to the things that they struggled with their parents, with just the world. And then I get it even more fold. Yeah, we'll say that's a word.
We're going to coin it as a new word,
exactly.
morphold.
Yeah. But then with the industry, and that has been a really interesting aspect too, of like, particularly talking with my mom, being another woman in the industry, coming up in a certain era, where not only, like I was saying about character actor, but like for her, the journey of going, I accept my casting as a character actor, I will play these types of roles. And she did, and she has been incredibly successful and played so many awesome roles, and I celebrate her so much. But then for me, coming in as a younger generation, also wanting to be a character actor, and also saying that I can be the lead. I can carry a story with my unique self, and there isn't one way to be a hero. Or to me, it's like an ingenue. I was never going to be an ingenue, but I can be a hero. I can be a protagonist, like seeing Elphaba, and more, we see. And obviously Discovery and other, shows are like saying, yeah, we can have this strong female lead. And that is okay. And they can be nuanced and flawed, and that can take different, forms depending on the genre of the show or play. But it's funny that just is kind of what struck me too, is like, I think my mom and I've ultimately had some really great, healthy conversations around that, because of course, as a mom, she wants to protect me. And coming back to Brene Brown, but one thing that she talks about in Atlas of the Heart is this Buddhist idea of near enemy, which is that the far enemy of love is hate, that we can really see that's not good. That is not, but the near enemy of love can be control. And I think we really see that in parents, which is that it's the thing that kind of deceives you into thinking it's love. So that, and it's rightfully so, parents do need to protect their children, and you do want to help protect your spouse from whatever, various forms of love. But at the same time, the true releasing of control is where the love can live. And so I think that theme has definitely been very prevalent to me. I didn't have the words for it until, I that near enemy thing I think is just so great. And that the near enemy of compassion or empathy is actually pity. So, because it's this way we protect ourselves from true vulnerability, is being oh, that's so bad for you, or ways in which that we distance ourselves and yet still feel oh, well, I'm pitying this person, so I'm not an evil person. But I think, especially with love and control, I think that that's a very interesting thing. And I, again, very grateful that with my parents, there's an acknowledgement on all sides that we're all flawed, we're all growing, but we have the best intentions. And so that allows for conversation. That allows me to go, I know that you feel that this is how one succeeds in the industry, but it is changing. And at the same time, just also recognizing, again, with the strike, part of why we struck last year was because things have changed so much that the way in which my parents were able to make a career is nearly impossible, or was. Hopefully we're shifting away from that. But there's so many different elements of that. And I feel, so clearly from my parents, I can see the genuine love and earnestness of why they may give advice in a certain way. But to come from an empathetic place, but then also I think what I continue to work on is how to stand my ground and go, I actually see it differently. And to move away from trying to keep things pleasant, and that challenging moments can still be filled with love at the baseline. That conflict doesn't necessarily mean it's the end of the world. Yeah.
Mike, are you going to ask a question there? Because I was wondering, were you going to ask? Mary, I was actually texting about a question. I said, would you make sure to bring this up? So I was there going, I'm just going to shut up now for a second. And I said, I'm going to leave that.
I love it.
Sorry, you know what? It's been quite I'm not going to say a heavy episode, but it's been quite a thought-provoking episode. So I'm trying to let a lot of it sink in and churn through.
I'm grateful to be in a space where we can chat. So let me, yeah.
Let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about Trek.
What?
I know. Strange. So, were you a Star Trek fan growing up?
I was aware, it was in the zeitgeist, of course. But I wasn't really exposed to it fully until the reboot films came out.
Okay.
And I went with my dad and one of my best friends in high school and loved it. I mean, the just the archetypes of the characters, and I do think those are just so well cast, and it's just, they're just great. Just the energy of that ensemble, and it made me want to know, the nostalgia that was kind of infused in that. I was wait, now I actually want to know who those characters are. And so then I did watch, the original movies and, some original episodes, but that really, again, was aware of TNG, was, had seen clips and things, but hadn't really watched it. And then, but again, big leaning on fantasy, but generally genre stuff, did enjoy sci-fi. Those were definitely the types of things I knew I liked, and grew up going to Comic-Con and that sort of stuff. And then when I was cast, that was when I did do the deep dive and wanted to watch every episode ever, but was okay, let's create some parameters.
Hang on, you're telling me you haven't watched every episode ever?
Oh. I know.
This interview is over. Turn it off, Mike. Just turn it off. It's over. It's done.
Get out of here. I know. Just but I did watch every Klingon featured episode. I would there's the list online. You can go I mean, I forget exactly, but on the Wikia page, it's every show, and anytime a Klingon is present, even momentarily. And I did watch through chronologically, Trek timeline wise, if that makes sense. So that was really fun. And I did get sucked into Deep Space Nine. Like I was watching enough, and there's so many Klingon episodes in there. Yeah. And I was like, oh, I just want to know, like, and because they, the Dominion War was starting to happen, I was like, I gotta know what's happening. It was getting so serialized. And so I did end up watching more episodes there that weren't just Klingons.
What were some of your favorite Klingon episodes, actually?
Well, my all-time favorite when it comes to like a female Klingon episode is the episode with Grilka. The first one. I mean, both episodes are great, but with Quark. What is it? I forget the name of the episode. But
House of Quark.
House of Quark.
There you go. Yeah. And I just loved Grilka as a character. So of course I really had my eye on how the female Klingons had been portrayed throughout canon, and wanted to like borrow and pay respect to what had come before. And I just loved her power, her humor. I think it's just a very fun episode, and then also really illuminated to me how still patriarchal the Klingon society was. And I remember mentioning that on panels even before the end of season 1 had been written. And I felt like Laurel kind of got like the most intense, grandiose version of the Grilka story.
It's like Grilka turned up to 11.
Yeah, exactly. And I appreciate the Spinal Tap reference. I do always.
Oh no, Mike, it's happened. She's aged the podcast. She's done it. It's happened. Mary, why? Every week. Every week someone says something that is so old that our audience is probably not going to know what it is.
Oh no.
So when you said Spinal Tap there, that is that. Well, look, we probably did with Murder, She Wrote, being honest with you.
We're true now. It's a good thing.
But hang on, I think Mary's the youngest one on the podcast at the moment. So,
well, there you go. Look at me taking my references. I referenced the 70s British.
Your Faulty Towers is that? Oh my God, this is the worst episode then for this. Oh my God.
No, but hang on a second. Things like Faulty Towers and Murder, She Wrote and Keeping Up Appearances, they are staples. Because, I mean, especially in the UK, they are on pretty much 24/7 on some random channel somewhere. So,
Totally. Gotta keep it going. There's a lot of good, physical comedy and all of that. Great characters. Again, great characters. I love seeing characters on screen.
So when you were doing your DS9 rewatch, you seem to have a particular affinity for the shape-shifting security guard. Would that be right? You're thinking
Odo?
Yes.
I mean, I definitely do. I mean, I just love all the characters. I mean, I will say that for me, Kira and Dax were like incredibly significant as both aspirational and crushes. And then, but I do love Odo.
What is it about Odo that kind of is unique for you?
That's a good question. I mean, like, I feel like I'll actually say, when I was doing a rewatch and looking at both Odo and Armin as Quark, just, I think at that point, most recent rewatch, I had been through the prosthetics. And I was just really appreciating, again, the humanity that they both bring, and knowing that it's like, you've got your eyes. And I think they had a little bit more of mouth. Well, at least Armin did, I guess. Well, but then you've got the teeth. Like, there's so many different things that can either help you or hinder you in developing your character. And I was noticing, because obviously they're very featured throughout every season, but there's a lot of them at the beginning of the show. And I remember just being struck by these distinct characters and again the humanity they bring. And I think Renee is like Armin, just great souls, and seeing someone work within the prosthetic and bringing that heart, and again to characters that are quite unlikable in many ways. And I think people can have opinions about the choices that they make, and obviously I relate to that as Laurel.
Don't know what you're talking about.
I know. She doesn't do anything controversial at all. But I think I was, just really appreciating their artistry as actors. And I've been, sadly, we don't have Renee with us anymore, but was able to, you know, have some lovely interactions with him. And then Armand and Kitty Swink, his wife, are dear theater friends in LA. And so it's been really cool to be able to continue that relationship and just be, you know, celebrating them as actors.
So rewinding slightly then, how did the role on Discovery come about?
It's a fun origin story. I'll do the Spark Notes version. But I had pretty recently graduated from Juilliard. I graduated in 2015, and then 2016 was when the show was like coming into existence, and Brian Fuller was at the helm initially. And I, funnily enough, was doing a one-woman show about Carson McCullers, who is a lesser known Southern Gothic playwright who kind of was just before Harper Lee and writing very similar stories, but a little bit, she was, you know, definitely a queer woman defining herself differently at that time. But like that was, she was investigating that, obviously subjects of race within the South. And then Harper Lee wrote
Kill a Mockingbird.
Kill a Mockingbird, there we go. Carson would be very proud. Carson was a bit like, she took my stories. But this very fascinating woman who Suzanne Vega, the musician and singer, looks very similar to, and had this affinity for her since college and had written a one-woman show and was continuing to develop it. And I was asked, you know, through serendipitous events, someone knew that I had Southern heritage, that I was a singer, blah, 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 came from Juilliard. So I got to be part of this workshop process, where as a writer, Suzanne got to see it on another actor and help, you know, cut so that she wasn't also acting and all this sort of stuff. And I did, we had like 2 weekends in LA where we did the workshop, and I invited anyone and everyone. And luckily had, I very fortunately knew Brian Fuller through some of the work that my mom had done on some of his shows, and invited him and his partner and other folks. And luckily playing this like singing Southern gal. And then in conjunction, I think, with knowing I had the Juilliard training, the Shakespeare training, that I had just played Macbeth and Iago. Brian knew that Klingons were going to be a central part of the season 1 story. And initially, Laurel really was like, well, Mary's 6 feet tall, square jawed. Again, all of the things kind of convalesce. We're going to be redesigning. I think it would be so great to have someone like Mary to just be this great model, to start building what female Klingons look like. And so through that was essentially the initial casting. Also, CBS casting had come to my Juilliard showcase the year prior, and had seen my work, and I had a meeting with them separately. And so there was like this kind of awareness of who I was. And again, the training, and that is something I'm incredibly grateful for in the Juilliard training, not only what I actually got out of 4 years, but that people do know, okay, this is someone who has definitely worked on Shakespeare, who has definitely done a lot of physical work. And then for me, particularly for a Klingon, with my height and everything, they were like 6 feet or taller. So initially cast, and also Captain Phasma had come into existence with the new Star Wars film. And so this idea of a female commander who wasn't necessarily overtly feminine, but just was doing her job. So that was kind of the initial idea of who Laurel could be. And then, as I said, like in those first few episodes, I have a few moments with Takuma. There was one scene that in the pilot that ended up getting cut, very simple, of me being like, telling him something that was happening, talking to Takuma or whatever. And so initially just came on as this character, and that was all I was guaranteed, was those first 2 episodes. And then there was a changing of the guard, and Aaron and Gretchen came on as showrunners. And they were also, you know, aware of who I was and my work. And in knowing what the Tyler plot had to be, they knew they needed another Klingon to kind of make it happen, I think. And again, you know, I don't know the full inner workings of the writer's room, but there was a sense of like, oh yes, I think it would make sense that this other character, who was kind of Takuma's right-hand person, that she would be the one to come up with this idea. And that's kind of how the fourth episode came to be. And that to me felt like really my audition for like who Laurel ended up being, which was like, here are a ton of scenes in full Klingon. Here's, you know, like, the dilithium processor scene, like, can you infuse humanity and love into these characters? And so luckily that to me was a big pivotal moment. And after we did that episode, I was able to like meet with the writers' room, and they more or less told me what the general arc they were planning for the rell was. And again, I was, credited as guest star, but at that point it was when, oh, Laurel's going to really be a recurring character, especially for this season. And but I do tend to joke every day was an audition, because nothing was promised, but they continued to get to know me. And then because it was that first season of this first new show, like there was nothing else, I was also doing a lot of these panels for press, talking about the Klingons. And again, I'm grateful that I had done my research and could speak well to the Klingon and spew out some Klingon if need be. And I think there was a real, team energy. They saw that I was a real team player, and also was just so thrilled to be a part of a show where you do have someone like Sonequa, who I'm sure everyone who's involved with Discovery has spoken to, what an incredible leader she is, and how she really sees the humanity in every person, and would, gather us all together for game nights and, dinners and things like that, and made everyone really feel seen and respected, and did not create the hierarchy that unfortunately a lot of the industry just kind of caters to. So I was so just like empowered to, uphold my part of the story so that her show could just continue to thrive. But yeah, so that's, I said the Spark Notes version, but to me, it is funny. It wasn't just like came in and read some lines and they said, you got it, and then I did it. It was this kind of evolution of character, and really felt that, it was a real collaboration, especially in that first season.
When you talk about collaboration, Mary, in terms of, say, Neville Page's work, in terms of all the makeup and things like that, how much did his work on that help you with the role?
Well, I do love that you mentioned Neville, because he in particular, we didn't meet like in the first few, well, I'm trying to think, we had a brief interaction. I was getting fitted, or cast literally. And so we were aware of each other. We somehow had each other's contacts, or I can't quite remember how it all came together. But at a certain point, when I was back in LA in the midst of filming the first season, I said, your design is, so fun to play with, and I would love to get a coffee and that sort of stuff. So we met up. And one thing that he said that was so helpful to me was, I was saying that I was starting to discover, again, coming from the kind of physical mask work and various things I had done in school, that I had my eyes, and then I had this big, ridge, and that kind of turning it back and forth really helped imbue expression and reaction. And he said, oh yeah, and I designed it like those holes, because they're like, if you really looked at it in detail, there were all of these like sensors that he had designed in there. And he was like, his idea was that it was more from the back, where we could sense smells and all sorts of things. So once he told me that, I like doubled down. Like I know it's not like, I'm sure it's not as obvious as I like to portray it, but I feel like it's like from then the fifth episode onward, I'm like doing all sorts of
I'm walking backwards.
Like, but it did, and at that point there was a lot with me and Tyler, and I think this ties further into like my premise around Laurel and her sensuality as much as sexuality. I think that there's like such a distinction there. I think we over sexualize things, but that sensuality is such an essential part of like who the Klingons are too. And, we do see it oftenly more comedically portrayed in earlier iterations of the Klingons, or, so a way to kind of find that sensual nature, this kind of feline serpentine energy, really just having that ridge and knowing that that was part of it was like so helpful. And I do love that I was able to talk with him, and you were speaking to this about bringing on people from all sides of the camera on this podcast. And I think that that is so wonderful, because that is a huge thing that I have come to celebrate and love more and more, and especially on being on the show, because by talking with Neville, by not feeling like as the actor I had to be siloed into this one corner, that the more I got to know folks from all sides of the creation process, the more it was genuinely a collaboration.
So in terms of bringing a new generation of Klingons into existence, how did you approach that?
Yeah, I really, for me, I wanted to know what had come before. And so really watching all of those episodes, getting a sense of what different actors had done with it. But then knowing, obviously, that the design was very different, and I had no control over that either. But to then go and knowing that the overall premise was to make them look more alien, and what does it mean to really embrace this truly foreign energy, and this idea that, especially with the House of Takuvma, that he is about bringing back, there was like an organic quality to these Klingons. And so really finding how that resonated in my body, and then in the shifting over to when I did start speaking English, because again, in the beginning, we're just really doing the Klingon. So it's pretty easy to feel very foreign when you're speaking a different language. But wanting to make sure that the dialect that Laurel had was authentic to a Klingon that had been minimally exposed to, the Federation, knew of it. And as Laurel says, she's descended from spies from House Mokai, and that like she's proficient in English, but that she would have an accent. Like I was saying earlier with like, it's you find out how culturally and the different sounds. And I literally did take the Klingon dictionary, and Mark, has a list of all of the different sounds in Klingon. And with the Klingons, they have one sound for each vowel, very different from Swedish. and, and so that was really fun to build with Ria. We literally made this dialect sheet with the different changeovers, and massaged it, because the language was not necessarily built to become an accent. And we want people to be able to understand it, what I'm saying, but leaning on, okay, if the O is the kind of one O sound that Klingons have, then most of those sounds that I say will lean in that direction. And then obviously with consonants, they're very consonant heavy and very, intense. So like if I did say how, I would probably have a little bit of that rasp, how, like, that my vocal cords were used to making that sound as a Klingon. So really playing with that, like wanting that to be honoring of this new iteration, but still paying respect to, because ultimately they are very Shakespearean in the way that Klingons speak in the past. So knowing that there's a regality, regardless of status of the Klingon, like Laurel ends up being literally in a regal position, but even before that, that there's a way of speaking. And then also no contractions was just like a choice that I made. So if I would get certain lines in English and it was don't, I would say, I'm going to change it to do not. And they were always obviously cool with that. But it was just like little things of someone who like knows the language really well, but still is going to adhere to what they're used to in their language. And then, the outfits and everything like that just kind of forces you to live in a certain physicality that's always been, that the armor and everything, and then literally being on set for 16 hours and having to stay cool and having ice packs, and like you just have to be in this very, again, certain sort of siloed place to then be present in the actual scenes. And I felt that that catered both to like the overall Klingon energy, but then specifically the rell as someone who initially wants to work from the shadows, is kind of reserved, and then once she becomes chancellor, has to be reserved because of you know, the societal expectations of her as a ruler. But kind of, yeah, again, continuing to yes and all of the different circumstances, physical and otherwise, that I was grappling with on a daily basis on set to make it work.
Looking back on it, Mary, what kind of, like, if you were to describe Laurel as a person, how would you describe Laurel?
I mean, the first word that came to my mind was brave.
Yeah.
It's certainly in like how I felt on the inside, like whatever her actions were, I think I just leaned on who I am as it, you know, allegedly a very like strong, powerful person, but that vulnerable self on the inside who is still scared. And she did work from the sidelines because she didn't think it was her place. And she says that to Burnham in the finale of the first season, but I am no one. You know, that she really does not see herself as significant until she has to be. And I think tying it back to The Lion King, but I do love Mufasa says, I'm only brave when I have to be. I think there's a lot of good snaps in that. Also based on Hamlet, keeping all.
Yep.
I do love that moment with Mufasa and Simba, that whole scene and conversation, because I do think it really speaks to a truth of like, you don't go out trying to prove your bravery.
Yeah.
That Laurel is someone who's truly brave because she sees what she needs to do to help her society. Brave and yeah, it's funny, that's what's really striking me. And again, I love that she changes. She's willing to change. She's a great leader because she actually takes in, I think, and I did like that she was coming from spies. I like leaning on the fact that she's a great observer. And not only did that help the dialect, also I decided that like as she gets to know and hear more English speaking, you know, people that she's kind of taking on, like she's just a very
absorbent.
Yeah. That really kind of takes things in. And so on a very specific level with an accent or whatever, but then also on a larger level of seeing why Saru is able to convince her to change Tyler is because she sees the pain. She's willing to see what's in front of her and not turn away.
So how much of you is in Laurel?
So much.
That is the least surprising answer, I think, of anything we've asked today.
Yeah. It is funny because in asking that question, I mean, I felt like there was so much in her journey too in the first season of coming out of the shadows. And for me, it was like, this is my first big job. And like I was saying about the casting process, like I didn't know where I was headed. And like, it was so exciting and also terrifying. And again, as someone who Mary can be perceived to be, again, like confident and powerful and all of these things. And essentially that is who I aspire to be and can be on many occasion, but then have a lot of heart on the inside, a lot of vulnerability, a lot of sadness, and a lot of there's a real heart in there, and a really caring heart, and a heart that wants to make a difference and do what's right in a world where right and wrong are just very blurry.
I have to ask you the Adam Driver question, Mary, and you're there going, what in the name of God is the Adam Driver question? The Adam Driver question is, do you find it hard to watch back your own performances?
Okay. I love that you have the Adam Driver question, but mainly because all I want in life is to be a female Kylo Ren. Like, and I got a good amount of that within, like, Laurel definitely like caters to a lot of those wants and needs. But I love that this is a different Adam Driver question. But I like as an archetype in like what he gets to do and what he got to do in Kylo, like that sort of being angry and pain, and like again, like there's a certain like allowance that we have when it comes to like a brutal man who's like struggling with that, and I like want more and more of that to be available to women. But anyway, I digress. When it comes to watching back stuff, so I with Laurel really was able to watch back quite easily because she's so different looking than I am. I do feel I probably would have had a different experience with the show had I been playing a human, or even, you know, a Vulcan, something where it is much more of my own face. I think I could really step back and just appreciate this creature that had come to life. I still think what's interesting, I think where I can get more critical is, and unfortunately happens a lot in TV, is like you did this full scene and it's either cut down or cut, or like, and coming from theater training, I like try and build the arc of my character throughout the episode. I get the full episode, I know, or within the scene that like, at this point I'm mad at him, but by the end I'm going to be happy. So allowing that to kind of progress in a way that feels organic to me. And so that's where I can, be critical of my performance, because, and it's not like it's poorly edited. It's just that in my mind, it was like, she was going to have this energy in this moment. And then the next time they come back, oh, we skipped that line now. So now, now it looks like I'm reacting in a different way. And so I found the closer I was to having filmed something and watching it, I could be a little bit like, but still, see that it was working, but just kind of be sad that I was like, I was there on the day, and I remember I really loved that other take. But now I've had enough distance that like, if I'm putting together a reel or something like that and using some Laurel clips, I have enough of a faded memory that I can just really more appreciate what is on the screen, which is great. But yeah, I've had more recent experiences, this short film that my partner Maddie wrote that we both starred in, and then actually Terry Farrell has a featured role in it as well. And
is that every morning, is it?
Yes. And we're hoping to have it fully available on streaming at some point this year. So definitely follow my Instagram and we'll keep you updated. But we produce that with Spacetime Productions, which is Dr. Aaron McDonald, who is the science consultant. So that was a whole cool experience. But within that, obviously, then I am watching myself in human form, in a more recent human form. And again, I was a part of the shaping process of that. So I did have a little bit more of a conversation with our director about editing, and like, but still ultimately near enemy of love is control. So like moving back in love. So I think that I, for the most part, feel like I am able to. I'm interested to see if there are roles that for whatever reason in the future took a certain toll or whatever, how I'll be. But so far, like I also, got to do a really fun NCIS cold open, and I really enjoyed getting to watch those scenes. And so it's, I think it's going to be a case by case basis. I can still, I think it's just, there's some sort of like uncanny valley that happens to humans when we watch ourselves, because it's just not quite how we think we are. Like even if it's like, oh no, I look in the mirror and that's definitely like who I am. But I think it at this point you just kind of have to get used to it. There's just look at your face, and then there's also performance, and I think it's just gonna have to depend on any circumstance.
I think it's kind of like nowadays, like with Zoom meetings and things like that, all of our eyes are naturally drawn to ourselves. And I can guarantee you, at some point, all three of us have just stared at your own reflection here in the camera going, does my hair look good there now? And that looks absolutely fine, things like that. Mary, I wanted to ask you about the late, great Kenneth Mitchell, and what was he like to have on set? What kind of personality was he? Because the impression that we all kind of got is he was a wonderful, loving, kind, fun individual. I just wanted to ask you a bit about him. What were some of your memories of being around him?
Absolutely. I mean, he truly was a personality in the best way. And I feel so lucky that, most of my Klingon time was spent with him and then Shazad. And between the three of us, I love to talk about when we came back for the second season and had that big, ginormous Klingon episode kind of out the gate. And the three of us were all in the same the hotel residential section, like to film it. And we were there for pretty much a month because it was the first time we were coming back. They had reshaped, Ken had a new character, everything was kind of new. So I called that Klingon summer camp. And not only was it fun to be working on the scenes, and we had a lot less Klingon, we were a lot more English, so that was a little bit easier. But we just had so much fun, and Ken was from Toronto. And so early on in the first season as well, when we were, taking on the days that we had off, and he studied architecture. And so he would kind of take me around the city and point things about architecture out. And I really loved art history, but architecture, like I appreciate it, but I could never like cement things in my brain. So I was like, oh yeah, that's great. But yeah, we were just so fortunate that we got to have so many great dinners early on, just getting to know each other. And he is also very Canadian, and he was so kind that I was like, what's your deal? And I was like, oh, he's just Canadian. Like,
That's
just
the
so
inner spy Lorel in you. That's what it is.
yeah. I was like, what's going on? You're just a nice guy. But truly, like, we developed such a beautiful, brother sister relationship that we could just be goofy with each other. And then also, very much like in the trenches, there were certain episodes where we had a lot of Klingon together, and it was one of the ones where we didn't get it as soon as we would have liked, and really had to come together with Ria, our dialect coach, and like get it in there as best we could. And we did request some cue cards just to, like, and we all done, like, at some point on the show, every cast member has had to ask for cue cards, and but just really had to bond together and be obviously then in the prosthetics for again 16 hours at a time, and finding ways just to keep a levity, and going back to the Klingon summer camp in the second season, there were a lot of fun anecdotes, especially because we had hair. And Ken had like this like mane, and he looked like, he looked like a creepy Klingon Santa. Like it was like, and of course was really into Kolshaw, because Kolshaw was just like even more like, ah. And he, particularly like I think around the time we were doing like the fight scene or whatever, he would like pretend between takes be like, what do you want for Christmas, little boy? And then like Shazad would be like, oh look, I like a toy boat or whatever. And we just goofed around, and I would get in trouble because I am a very giggly person, and like you're not supposed to really move your mouth unless you're in the scene talking. So I would just have to like go like this and like which was very fun. And so that was a lot like on set again, just like it was a lot of really intense days, and we were able to really find a way to be playful but not overextend. And then, just to have someone that you can really decompress with and on your time off. And then from that, then the conventions started happening, and we did most conventions together. We have the same reps, and we're very much the Klingon duo. And especially in the first season, Shazad couldn't be a part of the Klingon clan. Like,
of course, yeah.
So Ken and I were really carrying that torch, and got to do After Trek, and like just a lot of really great moments. Also, he always liked to bring Klingon into the panels, which was so fun. Just like come in and do the whole persona. And it just made it such a fun adventure. And I think another thing that bonded us was that we both really cared, like, and cared about the franchise, about our characters, and I think that's a very strong aspect of the Discovery cast overall. Is and those behind the scenes in Discovery as well, but like that we all geek out about stuff, whether it be Star Trek or something else, and then we geek out about our characters. And so to be in these environments where you're at a convention and you really get to talk about it, and like there's a celebration of the Trek community that Ken really carried with him. And then obviously when he was diagnosed with ALS, knowing that, at a certain point he was going to share it, and that he was going to allow this journey to be something that was witnessed publicly. And I really, admired that, and was grateful to be a part of that sharing process, both first within our like cast community, and then once it was more public with the fans, and like just again finding this great levity. And coming back to it's interesting, you asked me earlier about emotions and everything, and I think that was a moment when he was diagnosed, obviously, for me, and like an exposure to grief, and exposure, because it is like you kind of have an innate grief happen even though the death hasn't happened yet. And witnessing him process those emotions along with his family, and for me too, of like understanding what is it to be present, and his whole premise that he really brought on the Star Trek cruise with the Klingon rave and everything was both, connect was like a huge, word that he talked about, and in his, on the post that recently when he did pass of what he had written about, just really being with each other. And I think that was so how he led his life, and so how, I aspire to like move forward in my life. And I think another reason why I want to keep investigating all of the emotions and all of who I am, because I think that's going to allow me to be as present as possible. But also still be really goofy, because that's the thing. He would like say this beautiful, lovely thing, this sentimental thing, or like you're like on verge of tears, and then he'd make some silly joke. And not even like there's a diffusing of the energy, which I think is, helpful and good, but it was also like, that's life. Like it can shift that quickly, and you kind of just have to be present for all of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm very grateful that I was able to share time and space with him as a Klingon through the diagnosis. And then, we were on the cruise when he passed away. So that was its own experience and kind of its own wake, which I was in many ways, grateful feels like a strange word, but grateful to be in a space with so many people who understood who he was and what my relationship was with him, and like that it allowed for a moment to kind of breathe through that and be present. We got to do kind of this celebratory rave as well,
yeah,
in honor of him, and it felt very much like that's exactly what he wanted.
Thanks for sharing all that, Mary. It's really kind of special to have told us all those memories you have of him. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Mary, can I just ask you a question? Look, I know the answer to this already. I strongly suspect if the opportunity arose again, would you come back as Laurel, or would you come back as another character?
Yes, and yes. Okay. Yes, I mean, I really, in just with Star Trek Online too, getting to come back to Laurel and this other story, and they wrote such a fun Klingon, arc there. So getting to embody her again was so fun, and without the prosthetics was actually not too shabby. Just getting to her, I wasn't upset. But yeah, I really do, like I said, she is very close to me in my heart, and like any opportunity to be her again would be so wonderful. But I also, again, I agree. I think the gift of being a prosthetic character is that there are ways in which you can come back in different forms, and I love transformation. So even if it's, I mean, yes, there's a part of me that's like, great, just make me a human. But there's so many great species out there. Like it would be fun to explore tons of them and just see different aspects of myself. Because I think, sci-fi and fantasy, all of these genres that have creatures or aliens, they're just, talk about like different expressions and emotions. They're like different ways in which as humans we process things. Like I often say, like Klingons and Vulcans are both like highly emotional, but they just deal with it in the complete
different ways.
way. Like
yeah, Klingons are pretty much led by their emotions, and the Vulcans ignore their emotions. So they are the polar opposites.
I remember James Frayne saying that about playing Sarek, was like, he's like, I wish I could deliver it the way he did, but like it was like, no, Klingons are very, I'm not like Vulcans, are really, they have emotions, but they kind of push them down and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, and I'm British. So he just, I do him enough justice, but he really, like, as he was saying it, I was like, where is he going with this? And he just hit that joke so like, I do think it's very fun. I would be interested. There's so many different species, but to do a Vulcan or a species that is so like not Klingon energy would be really fun.
Mike, I think we have time for one last question from Mary, do we?
Yep. You will be able to answer this, no problem. I'm pretty sure. It's a really easy question. We ask it of all of our guests. So, Mary Chieffo, what does Star Trek mean to you?
So I'm like, I've talked so much. I'm like, what's the most concise way that I will start with the first word that came into my head was hope. And then I was thinking of infinite diversity and infinite combinations. And I think those go hand in hand because that is the hope I have for the world.
Yep.
And where I hope that we can head, and hopefully Trek is aspirational. And in the way that also not only looking at the stories that have already been told in Trek, but that my hope for the franchise, like as an entity, as this commercial success, is that it continues to truly embody infinite diversity and infinite combinations, especially behind the scenes, because we're seeing so much progress in front of the camera. And it is happening behind the scenes as well. But this is my hope for every story being told right now, is that the more that we truly embody infinite diversity and infinite combinations and know that our work is never done, but it doesn't mean that the work isn't valuable.
No.
So that is really the hope I have for Star Trek. And I wouldn't have that hope had I not been exposed to the show and its premise. Like, I think it is innately asking for that. And we've seen that in every iteration of the show, is that it continues to progress. And I just hope that that continues to happen.
I love that.
Did I give a good answer?
Hit the nail on the
Yeah,
head.
you nailed on the head there, Mary.
Because that's pretty much my answer as well. So
I'm glad. Yeah.
great minds think alike. So Mary, thank you so much for joining this week. This has been phenomenal. It's definitely one of my favorite episodes I've been on, for sure. For everyone watching and listening at home, remember you can catch up with more Clonestar podcast at clonestarpod.com. But until next time, live long and prosper.
Habla!